when the total meltdown happens, the 100 tons of uranium, which is the core of the reactor, would then become molten at 4,000 degrees centigrade. And they would then melt the containment, which is the primary containment. It's a stainless steel, 15-20 centimeters thick at the bottom. They will melt through that. Then they will melt through the concrete, which is holding up this shell, this reactor. And that will take, as you said, perhaps 24 hours. But then that molten uranium at these high temperatures, because of the radioactive decay heat being generated all the time, very high heat, it will bore through the earth, through the ground, through the crust of the earth. And you cannot stop it.
Goodness me.
There's 100 tons of molten uranium at 3,000 degrees centigrade, burning its way through the ground. Now, if it happens that there are some underground water systems or cavities, then there'll be leakage and contamination, very serious contamination. But that molten ball will continue to burn through the crust until it reaches the very hot layers of earth in the middle of the earth and gets mixed up with that. There's no way to stop it.
No, and presumably no way of preparing or preventing that. If this is the worst case scenario, then you can't, if it's going to get to that level, you can't stop it happening, you can't stop it.
No, there's not been, fortunately, any total meltdown. The worst that we have known is in 3 Mile Island, 1979. 1/3 of the uranium core was melted. That caused the fracture of the primary containment, and there was release of the other case of Chernobyl. There was an accident. There was an they couldn't control the reaction, and that actually blew up. The reactor blew up. So it isn't as if that core melted on itself and became this molten lava.
Well, my term is this is Chernobyl on steroids. The chemicals that are going to be released are similar. Actually, the chemicals released from radioactive chemicals released from a nuclear bomb disappear quicker than the radiation that is released in a nuclear power plant. The fission spectrum in a nuclear power plant has longer-lived radiation than the fission spectrum in a bomb. You know, the Asiatic region, they're already beginning to reroute airlines because they're afraid of the radiation landing on the airplane. And, you know, a plane from Tokyo to Moscow, for instance, will fly through that plume. So it will definitely begin to affect Asiatic travel. I don't think the government is lying. I do think the government is not telling them everything it knows. You know, I studied Chernobyl and I was an expert witness on 3 Mile Island. And the government is always behind the 8 ball on these things. They are deliberately trying to downplay the amount of radiation being released. You know, we saw it in the Gulf of Mexico, too, with the oil spill. They underestimated the amount of oil. That seems to be the way bureaucracies work. The International Atomic Energy Commission estimated 5% of the core had failed. In fact, 70% had failed. So these guys have come in with lowball estimates for quite a few days now. I don't think there's anything an expert can do to physically help at this point. I think these reactors are on runaway.
Oh, I would agree with that for sure. I would suggest that it has very little, if anything, to do with safety. It has a lot more to do with sales. And, you know, atomic energy has been promoted very aggressively ever since, well, primarily the 1970s, where it ran into a dead end in 1979 and has resurrected itself here over the past 20 years as a viable solution to our global warming needs. However, some would say that it's really more or less about filling the pockets of some of the large multinationals. If you go back 30 years ago, you had 3 top scientists with General Electric, for example, who resigned amidst concerns that the designs for these Mark I reactors, of which 5 of the 6 reactors that we're dealing with here today that are going up in flames in Japan are Mark I designs. They resigned amidst these concerns that these designs would not stand up to the pressures of a natural disaster, and that the cooling power would just not be there to functionally be able to withstand this sort of a disaster. And today, that's exactly what we're seeing right in front of our eyes.
What about the UN energy watchdog, the IAEA? It's now sending a team of experts to help Japan, but this is 4 days now into the disaster. Why do you think they've taken so long to act?
because there's nothing they can do. The IAEA is a promoter of nuclear power. The IAEA is not any more efficient at solving this problem than FEMA was solving Hurricane Katrina's problems in the U.S. These organizations exist primarily for the purposes of aiding and assisting multinational corporations to provide their solutions to developing and advancing nations who are sold on the nuclear power solution. That's what we're dealing with throughout the entire world with the IAEA as a promoter of nuclear power, whose job is not to necessarily be able to come to the rescue of failed attempts at maintaining quality design and protecting the public from natural disasters such as we're dealing with here. Although they'll sell that message, when the proof is in the pudding, you can clearly see that the IAEA has absolutely no ability to deal with this problem any more than the Japanese government has the ability to deal with this problem. And at the end of the day, it's the people of Japan who have a right to be panicked, and they should be questioning the information they're receiving from their government, and they should certainly not be sitting back and believing that the government has this under control, because it's quite evident that they and the IAEA do not.
All right, well, many would be sharing your views about nuclear power. Indeed, those opponents of nuclear energy will say this exact situation vindicates their argument. What do you think will be the long-term implications of nuclear power now, the nuclear energy industry?
Well, I would suggest that they'll continue to flog it, the multinationals that have so much invested in this promotion, so to speak, as well as the IAEA, which is basically, as I say, a Trojan horse for Western elites and elite enterprises. I don't believe that it'll necessarily disappear overnight, but certainly the attempt will be made to continue driving forward. However, having said that, if it does maintain their agenda to continue to advance nuclear power, we would certainly hope that they will come up with more feasible designs, and that human beings would be a little more intelligent than to construct nuclear power plants in areas where known natural disasters are likely to occur or could occur. And certainly Japan is not a surprise to the world that an earthquake would happen like this off the coast of Japan, creating this sort of a disaster. It's always been known to be in a position geographically that is not conducive necessarily to these sorts of ultra dangerous types of power facilities. And nuclear power is dangerous, regardless of what anybody likes to say.
Well, I said right from the beginning that this was a Chernobyl-level disaster, because it was quite clear to me at that time, having looked at the explosions, that there were major problems with those reactor pressure vessels, and it now turns out that there are, and that at least one of them is cracked and there's fuel all over the place. The similarities with Chernobyl are quite real, and in fact, in a way, this is a much worse accident than Chernobyl, and the reason is that there are a lot of people living nearby. The population of the 100-kilometer zone is about 3 million, and out to 200 kilometers there's another 7 million people, and the contamination out to those distances, according to the IAEA, is about 1 megabecquerel per square meter. Now that's an awful lot of radiation. That's 1 million disintegrations per second per square meter of land, which is about twice as high as the Chernobyl exclusion zone. So there are going to be an awful lot of deaths, an awful lot of cancers.
Professor, can you just clarify for me, the reason that most of the officials said in the first place this wasn't like Chernobyl is because, unlike Chernobyl, there was containment over the reactors here in all of these. We think they're still intact, most of them anyway, and at those reactors. So that's why people were saying it's nowhere near as bad as Chernobyl. There was no huge, large-scale explosion. You're saying this is different. I just want to clarify it.
Well, anyone who looked at the video footage of those explosions wouldn't have said that there was no large-scale explosion.
Well, that's a hydrogen explosion, not a nuclear explosion.
Well, it was a hydrogen explosion in Chernobyl as well, actually, so it was the same thing, although there have been some questions about whether it was a hydrogen explosion then. But the other point that you've missed, or that people missed, is that there were a huge number of spent fuel rods sitting right on top of the reactor. So when it exploded, and everybody saw it exploding, all of those fuel rods went up in the air. And anyway, as we now know, it has melted down. So I don't think it suddenly melted down yesterday.
Is this
I think that thing was split right from the beginning.
Is this a worst-case scenario, then, as you see it? Or could it get worse than this? And what about the poor people that have to clean this up? They were called liquidators in Chernobyl. Even to this day, 25 years on, we're seeing Japanese human beings risking their lives. Do you think anything could have been learned?
I don't think anything could be done. The problem is that under those very high radiation fields, robots don't work, and they certainly found that at Chernobyl. At Chernobyl, they paid huge amount of money to the Germans to provide robots to go in there and remove the pieces of fuel, and the robots just packed up. They didn't work, because under those radiation fields, the electronics don't work. So you have to use people. Unfortunately, I don't think that even with the people there's much that they can do. The thing is out of control, and we have a sort of science fiction scenario now. I think it's going to be very, very bad for Japan, but at the moment I don't think it's going to be quite as bad for the rest of the world. Luckily, because there's a very large Pacific Ocean between Japan and the next major landmass, although I have to say there are increases in radioactivity occurring now in California, just in the last information in the last few hours.
So really what you're saying is we're not being told maybe the full picture as it's developing. And what about Tokyo? What fate lies ahead for Tokyo with its huge population?
Well, I have got data that shows that there are increases in radioactivity even to the south of Tokyo. So, given the large population of Tokyo and the population in the next section close to the site, there have been exposures to radionuclides. The main problem, of course, is not the radionuclides that show up on the gamma radiation monitoring systems, but the alpha-emitting radionuclides like plutonium and uranium, because these are invisible. They're not being detected. And I have to say that we're not being told everything. And right from the beginning, we weren't being told everything. And this is one thing that happened with Chernobyl as well. That is another parallel between these two situations, is that we don't get told anything, and the truth slowly comes out as if it's being dragged out of people.
How much of a blow has this been for the nuclear industry, or is it just too difficult to say at this time?
Well, I would hope that it would mean that the nuclear industry was finished. I mean, we can't... this is certainly going to... in my opinion, it's going to finish the north of Japan off. I don't see what they can do about it. They're going to have a very large exclusion zone. The cost is going to be absolutely phenomenal. So the nuclear industry, I think, is finished. But then I thought that after Chernobyl, to be honest, and what happened there was that there was a massive cover-up, an international cover-up by the nuclear lobby of all the health effects of the Chernobyl accident, which is only just coming out now. We now know, as a result of research, that at least 1 million people have died as a result of the Chernobyl accident, yet we still have the nuclear industry telling us that only a few liquidators died and there really wasn't any problem except thyroid cancer in a few children, and that can be cured. That was a pack of lies, and I think we're going to get another pack of lies after this, so people should watch out.